Hey, what's going on, guys? Mike from Hammer Away Fitness here. I wanted to notify you before we dive into this episode that I will be conducting an upcoming Q&A for the website. So if you are interested in potentially getting your questions answered on the Muscle Memoirs, then you can drop them in the comments below or shoot me a message on Instagram at Hammer Away Fitness. Now let's get into it. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Memoirs Podcast. Today, it is my pleasure to be joined by Bob Waterhouse. Bob, how you doing, my man?
Hey, man, very well, thank you, and thanks for having me, first of all.
Absolutely. Real quick, for our listeners who might not be familiar with you, could you provide them with a brief background about yourself?
Sure. So I've been bodybuilding for the last 12 years or so. I won my natural pro card with the BMBF or DFAC back in 2013. And I have just recently, the last month or so, become an IFBB Classic Physique Pro. So I've obviously sort of gone through the channels and the affiliates to the IFBB, which is through the Two Bros Pro Federation in the UK. And currently about 4 weeks away from my first pro show.
Fantastic. I'm super excited for our discussion today, Bob. On this podcast, I like to think we do a pretty phenomenal job of covering evidence-based practice and all the dimensions that make that up. So, we have a lot of episodes with researchers on, both in exercise science and nutrition, those primarily working in the lab and academia. And I also love to get professionals in the field, working in the trenches, high-level athletes like yourself. I'm passionate about bodybuilding as a whole, whether that be the natural side of the sport, the enhanced side of the sport. I like to cover it all. And the fact that you are a highly successful natural athlete, but also one that just achieved a fantastic accomplishment within the IFBB, I think that's awesome. And that's going to pave the way for a really cool chat. With that being said,
yeah, I'm definitely happy to add the bro science part to your science podcast.
It is more than welcome, Bob. With all that being said, I am curious about the initial outline of your competitive season. So I think achieving your IFBB pro status altered the course of that dramatically. But as far as your original intention, your idea behind doing this NPC show, what was the plan there to start things off?
So, first of all, I've done classic physique shows in different federations previously. So I did my very, very first one was the year I won my natural pro card in 2013, which was with the UK BFF, which is the United Kingdom Bodybuilding Federation, which used to be the affiliate to the IFBB. So before they had that split, that's basically was kind of like the route through. At the time, it was like classic physique was very, very new. I think it was probably one of the first years, I think, really, or at least second year. And basically everyone had always said, like, you've got a really good classic physique, you should do classic physique bodybuilding. But it just so happened, as you may have heard me explain before, that I always have a trouble getting ready for shows earlier in the year. So generally, I'm always coming down from a heavy off-season weight to then make kind of like contest weight. Not that I really, as a pro, that you're really stipulated too much with weight. Even for classic physique at the moment, I'm like nearly 30 pounds under the weight limit. And I think because I've just turned pro, I can have like another 7 pounds on top of that again. So I've got loads of growing to do, so that's okay. But basically, going back to the original question, is that was kind of like my first experience of it all. I never did as many as I would have liked to, just because the qualifiers, like the British finals with people like Two Bros, was like June. And I wouldn't usually be ready for a show until like September, October time, and Worlds are in November. So to try and kind of like get ready and like peak around that time of the year, it was like they would always be kind of viewed as warm-up shows in some retrospect. Not through any fault, other I'd love to turn up for one of them shows, like, absolutely spot on. But it's, it wasn't always really feasible for me, no matter how kind of early I started for some reason. So the idea really at the start of the year was to do the Two Bros show. I was very fortunate in the fact, because of all the mayhem going on in the world with the coronavirus, them shows kept getting pushed back. So it just gave me more time, actually. So for me, it just kind of worked out that way. But it was supposed to be a bit of a warm-up show and a bit of a run-out after doing 2 years off season, to then obviously do World Finals, which was supposed to be in the Cayman Islands this year in November. So they're obviously with the natural shows and everything. But however, I did view that show as a very important show. It wasn't like, oh, well, I'll just like jump in here at 50%. I wanted to be good. But as I said, it was just the timers and stuff, really.
Awesome. As you alluded to, this was kind of a warm-up show for you, though you were taking it seriously. I imagine that the intent was not that you were going to come out of this show with a pro card in a different federation. Since you obtained that, did that kind of change the course of the season for you?
It did and it didn't. I think it would be kind of, how should we say, a mistake to think that it looked like it was never a possibility, because I think that from my mindset of like looking at who turned pro in previous years and the standard of what classic physique was supposed to be and who was actually doing these shows, it tended to be a lot of just smaller bodybuilders, not really classic looking. So a lot of guys like heavily muscled, thicker in the waist, and kind of like not put together that well, but they just met a height and weight criteria. So, I was thinking like I could definitely beat some guys. Definitely the intention was always kind of like, oh, what if you turn pro? But I think in a lot of kind of how should we say, like thought processes was, let's just see how competitive you can be. That was really kind of how it was.
And what's next for you on your competition schedule, your next show?
So, I mean, as I said, yeah, it didn't really put a spanner in the works, other than the fact that I now can't do the natural federation. Can't do that one anymore. Through other reason, if you win an IFBB pro card, you can't compete. You sign a contract to basically say you can't compete in other federations, not because I've suddenly decided to go enhanced. So just so there's clarification on that. So that's the first part. And the World Finals were actually cancelled anyway in the Cayman Islands. So that kind of, was kind of blessing in disguise, really. So I don't feel so kind of like, because the World Finals is always great. So that was that one. And yeah, I mean, I had at the start of my year the intention to be dieting through to around November, December time, because the Two Bros Natural show, which is happening next weekend, that show was originally announced that it may happen in December. So when they released the dates for the other shows, they hadn't quite released that show. That was going to be like my main show for one of the main shows for the year as well, because I knew that would give me enough time. So my whole thought process when that was like talked about was like, well, you're going to be dieting to December regardless. So it was kind of like, it's no real pain to be on a diet still, if you know what I'm saying. I was already kind of set up for that. For
sure. Now, you have obviously caught a lot of buzz from achieving IFBB pro status as a natural. I listened to a bit of your episode on Fuad's podcast. I saw you were on Nick's Strength and Power video on YouTube, and I assume there's been more people checking out your social media, making comments about what you're doing. How, if at all, has the perception of you as a natural athlete changed amongst your audience? Would you say that you've caught any more flack as potentially not being a natural athlete as a result of this accomplishment?
Do you know what? Way less than I thought. Way less than I thought. I mean, I think that I've been on other podcasts and everything in the past, and talk quite intensively about, or if that's the right word, about the nature of how they do all the drug testing and how, like, the top pros and stuff like are top natural pros. They're not just like good at passing a drug test. And yeah, like the YouTube comments were like absolutely like, you've completely messed up your channel. You've had a fake natty on there and all this. So I kind of expected a little bit of that, to be honest. But I think what was so good with the Fuad podcast was that it was able to like have some context behind it. Like if you've been competing in a natural federation and, since 2008, and progressively gone through the ranks and slowly got better and better and better over like a 12 to 15 year period, and then obviously winning a pro card, and then obviously doing well in classic physique. You can see, like I said, like there's not a huge jump in body weight. There's like it's just like time done over the craft. So I think that it maybe resonates with people a little bit better because it's kind of like living evidence. Like this was the progression. This how long it took. And, as I said, he's not suddenly gained, 50 pounds of scale weight. It's like he's pretty much the same weight as he is now as he was 12 years ago. And that's the kind of, the sort of thing I think maybe where people have gone, wow, maybe it is possible,
Exactly. Yeah. The track record definitely speaks for itself. And I'm happy to hear that things have gone relatively well. Unfortunately, in the natural bodybuilding community, the quote unquote evidence-based community, it's become increasingly clear that there's this progressive nihilistic culture, about, well, for one, there's this natty witch hunt, right? So, this idea of trying to call out people who are hiding their drug use, and that seems to be part of the issue. And then alongside that, there's this pessimistic tone about how much progress you can make as a natural athlete each year, and trying to put someone's progress in a box, right? Oh, you're an advanced athlete. You can only gain 1 pound of muscle per year. And I think this is a huge issue within our space at the moment, because while I think it's a good idea to raise awareness to potential bullshit going on in the industry, this tone, it's not great for people coming up in the sport who are excited, they're motivated, they want to maximize their progress, because if you're telling these people, no matter how much time and energy you devote to this sport, your return on investment is always going to be poor as a natural athlete, it's not a great outlook. And for this reason, I've been combining natural athletes and enhanced athletes on the show. We've recently had on Jack Thorburn and Matt Jansen, as well as Chris Bearcat and Johnny Rosari, to kind of talk about these discrepancies and these misbeliefs within both sides of the sport. And this common idea is that the major weakness within the natural community at the moment is this idea of a genetic limit, and that's something that's not present on the enhanced side of the sport. These guys each year, doesn't matter if they've been trained for 15 years, they're like, I'm going to put my all into it, and I'm going to get a great return on investment. The amount of work I put in is going to equal what I get out of this. So for that reason, I think you're in a really good spot to provide some perspective on this, both as an athlete with your accomplishment as well as being a successful coach. This idea of the genetic limit, what have you seen in regard to the perspective of most of the athletes you train and work with? Is there a pessimistic tone? Do you think that this genetic limit is over-exaggerated within our community?
I think there's a number of things really to first look at. So I think that when we talk about like people like, who aren't natural, obviously claiming that they are, whether that be for sponsors or whatever, I think that's sometimes quite damaging, because I think that, you can have guys who maybe jump up on a guest post and like, oh, this guy's natural, very well known in the industry, because then people are annoyed, I guess, because they're saying, well, this guy's natural and this is what you can achieve. And I think that, and you could put me in the same box if you like, but the problem is that, like, the physiques look completely different. Like the biggest example, without throwing anyone under the bus, would be like your, what was the name? It wasn't Muscle Mayhem. I can't remember the name of the federation. It was a UK federation, and it was supposedly drug tested, but it wasn't drug tested. And, you've got some guys out there who've got massively distended growth hormone guts and never looked like a day they'd be natural. And then they're just saying that they're natural. And I think that I wouldn't say it's damaging because people are just going to go, okay, well, that's just, that's another thing. But I just think that, that's the thing, that's what people are annoyed about. It's like, saying that this is now the limit of what you can get to, but then no other natural on a natural stage actually looks like that. Like if you go to a DFAC World Finals or a WMBF World Finals, it's kind of like the guys will have that kind of overall, most of them will be pretty pleasing to look at. Midsections are all pretty much in check. So it's kind of like, I guess that's the main thing, really. I would say it's like that can be the damaging side. But can you just repeat what was the main thing, that last little bit you just asked? before I went for that.
So within the natural community, within your training, the athletes you work with, the athletes you correspond with, how do you view this idea of the genetic limit? Would you say that the people you're around, they're kind of optimistic in what they can achieve, or are they pessimistic because they're naturals?
I think the genetic sealant argument is, I definitely think that like people can get there quicker and younger these days because, you know, they've got more, how should we say, like knowledge behind them now. Like for mine, it was like, you know, trying to sift through forums to find any useful information and kind of like your old school books. But I also think the vast majority of people who weight train and the vast majority of people who, you know, follow bodybuilding or go or do bodybuilding shows, who aren't in that 1% of the, how should we say, genetic elite, it's very easy for them to throw caution out there and say, well, no way, this guy's natural. Because they'll have guys maybe even in the assisted community who are taking X amount of drugs, have been training 10 years and still don't look as good as the top naturals. So if they're like, well, I'm taking this much and training my ass off, this guy looks better than me, so he must be doing something. So as I said, but you know, I've talked about it before, but it's like we put that analogy into every other sport apart from bodybuilding. It's like, you know, for me, I'm never going to be a cross-country runner or like I'm going to beat Usain Bolt. And so I say, well, Usain Bolt must be faster than me because he's just using more drugs. It's kind of silly, but it's like, you know, for the vast majority of people out there who go in the gym, you know, it's called a genetic elite for a reason. So the guys who do make the cream of the crop and, you know, like, you know, that's the goal of everyone trying to aspire to, you know, there's an awful lot of genetic components that come into that. How well they put on muscle, how well, you know, they're put together. Like for me, I'm not the most heavily muscled guy out there on a natural bodybuilding stage. No, by no far or wide, especially like a lightweight compared to guys who are like heavyweight, you know, taller, thicker, wider, bigger muscle bellies, all that kind of stuff. But I'm put together very well. So, you know, that's why it works with classic physique. So I think that that would be my kind of answer really, is that everyone is just assuming that if they're at this kind of like, let's say, your third call outs in a show, they just assume that everyone above them must be doing something that they're not. And sometimes it's maybe a component, but a lot of the time it's that the guys are at the top, cream of the crop, like in the Olympia. If they were natural, they probably still would be to a certain degree that them same guys.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, if you look at Kai Green or Sean Clarito, they were competing in natural federations and they were outstanding, right?
Exactly. I think they're like great examples, you know, of like people who like, you look back at their pictures and say they're already world class. The fact that they've allowed to use, an enhancement to get them to the next tier. So like, you know, and I say, and they're already then doing very, very well in that tier as well. So that just kind of shows you that, you know, it's not necessarily because they're just then using more and more and more drugs. Kai Green probably didn't need to use hardly anything when he started and probably would just excelled at that rate because it's, you know, it's within his genetic, you know, ability to do so.
For sure. It is very odd, as you mentioned, that for some reason within bodybuilding, a lot of people don't like to think that there is a genetic elite. You know, we can think of traditional sports, and obviously we all understand that there's one LeBron James, and you just look at him and it's like, okay, you were born to do this. You have these genetic advantages. But for anyone who's, you know, well muscled, they can look at a weight and put on, you know, vast amounts of size. It's like, all right, well, that can't be natural.
Yeah, and that's it. It's just really silly when you say it out loud. Like you think, yeah, that's right. Like I'm not going to be a basketball player, but you know, as I said, I think it's because maybe, you know, that some of them things have a skill component to them, whereas something like bodybuilding, you know, it's really, I guess, apart from like training technique, there's not an awful lot of skill. It really is, you know, picking some heavy things up and down and eating some food to a certain point to either kind of yield a result of building muscle mass. So it's one of them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Bob, to perhaps provide a more specific example of, you know, this genetic ceiling or what you can accomplish from year to year, you're a very experienced and successful natural bodybuilder. Could you kind of touch on the progression throughout your career, more or less your stage weight as you have achieved pro status, both most recently and when you first became a pro natural bodybuilder?
Sure. So back in 2008, when I did my very, very first show, I competed around 12 stone, which is about 76 kilos or so, which I get you guys in pounds, right?
Kilos is fine.
So that was my very, very first show. Now, how I looked, well, for that first year when I won the British finals at that year at 22 years old, I was sort of one of the oldest juniors in the class. And I would say that at that point, like, my condition was good, but it wasn't great. So I had enough muscle separation everywhere to look decently stage lean, quite well put together, a little bit weak from the back. Glutes and hamstrings weren't quite in, but they were kind of like hard enough to kind of like, quads were really nicely separated. So there was, obviously I had body fat to lose. At the time, if you'd have asked me that, I'd have said, no, I'm ripped to the bone. But it isn't until you then do shows like I did the very next year later. I competed in the lightweight British finals and I got down to 72 kilos. So I got about another 4 or 5 kilos lighter again, about another 10 pounds at least, to make the lightweight cutoff for that year in 2009. I then repeated that in 2010, made lightweights in that finals there. So from then I took a 2-year off season. Now, that was the biggest jump in scale weight that I made in that 2-year period. But the reason why is because actually around 76 kilos, I looked quite good. But to try and make a weight class, and this is probably the problem that a lot of people have when you've got specific weight limits, like in the DFAC, they just split it on the day. If you've got 30 guys and you go the lightest 10, the middle 10, the heaviest 10, and it kind of works like that. If you've got to get, like, I knew I would rather be the heaviest lightweight than I would be like a middleweight, because I thought, you've got a better chance of winning. So that's kind of how you look at it. So what I did was I obviously sacrificed a lot of muscle and fullness to make that weight class. So I was doing 2 hours of cardio a day, 50 grams of carbohydrates a day. And that was like my prep for the last 6 weeks of that show prep. And yeah, felt like death warmed up, training sucked, and just kind of did everything to meet a weight criteria. So when I took that 2-year off season, obviously I probably got up to the very heaviest I'd ever been. I got up to about 111 kilos, which is like 17 and a bit stone. And that year was the year I won my pro card, and I competed at that. That was when I had the biggest weight drop over a prep, and I ended up at 76 kilos again for middleweights. So actually I was kind of the same weight as I was as a junior, but the physique looked completely different because I was on, a ton of carbs a day, doing very little cardio towards the end of prep, maybe only sort of half an hour a day or so in comparison. So the tissue had stuck on the frame, plus 2 years of heavy off-season lifting as well. And at that age, which I think is really important, because you almost went from a man to a boy to a man in that period. So for some people, they could take a 2-year off season in their 30s and not make that progression. But for me, it's like, my back training pretty much consisted when I was younger of pull-ups. It was like, that was kind of what I did in the gym. I didn't like training back. So, going back to like bent over rows and deadlifts and all that kind of stuff. So that off-season block was very, very productive for me, but it was also a number of factors to get that stage weight, was just because I was over dieted and depleted to make it the years before. So that's kind of how that went, as far as like, that's where I was turning pro naturally. And then to obviously the IFBB pro card, which was effectively another 6 or so, 7 years later, actually lighter than what I was when I won my pro card. So I was 74 kilos, so 2 kilos lighter, 6 or 7 years down the line. And I'm 73.5 today. So I'm even lighter again now. So I'm getting into the realms of where I was back in 2009 as a lightweight.
That's very interesting. I think for many within this field, if they look at an athlete experienced as yourself, they might suggest that you haven't put on much additional muscle, but you've probably gotten a lot better at the dieting process. What are your thoughts here on your progression over these years? Do you think that your off seasons have been productive and that you have been, slowly adding more size, or do you think you're just primarily getting better at the dieting process each time?
So 100%, evident muscle mass gain each year I compete. So I think that maybe in 2013, when I won my pro card, I would say my legs were fuller and the outside sweep looked a bit better. But what's happened now is that I've got more maturity and density to my legs. So there's a lot more detail going on. But secondly, my waist has got smaller. So some of that's conditioning, but it's a whole sort of maturity kind of thing that you get, and that's when, I guess, if you're a junior and you've been competing, a few years, even if you've got a good level of muscle mass, you never really understand what that kind of maturity is until you go and see someone who has a lot of maturity to them. You go and watch a masters class at a world finals, and you then understand they look like they've been like carved out of wood from like a big oak tree, as opposed to like if you snapped a branch in half on a very new tree, like it doesn't have all that kind of graininess and kind of like, building of over time. And that's effectively what you're kind of getting in their muscle groups. Like my shoulders as a junior used to look quite round and shapely, but no real detail. As I've kind of got older, they've just got sharper and a bit more detail and a bit more graininess to them. So it's kind of like, that's the kind of maturity aspect that we're talking about.
It's a fascinating concept because I think it's something we're all aware of in this community. When it comes to natural bodybuilding, like peak athletes are usually, they have at least 10 years plus of training under their belt. They're probably like in their mid 30s to like early 40s, which is like unheard of for any other sport. And we all describe it the same way. There's this granularity, there's this density of just like hard training over the years. And like no one knows why. We have like no physiological mechanisms to speculate why that is, but we all see it and we know it when we see it.
Exactly. It's just like something that's just been like, like toughened over time by sort of like brute force and trauma almost. So like the muscle has had to respond and get, better and stronger. And that's kind of what you get. I mean, your training will change as you get a bit older because you're almost forced to, because like you can't maybe manage to, like when I was a kid, like at 22, like, I would warm up with 100 kilos on the bench and it would bounce it off my rib cage and everything. But now it will take me half an hour to get up to 100 kilos on the bench. Do you know what I mean? Because everything's got to be mobilized and moved. But, if you look at the weights in comparison, okay, yeah, I'm probably stronger now than I was when I was that age. But, it's a whole different ball game, So I think that's, that's what takes that time. And it's them, them reps after reps after reps, like years after years of kind of like, like providing density to the physique. That's time in the gym, which you can't rush as a junior. And that's why it looks so different from new muscle to old muscle.
For sure. You've alluded to this pretty intensive off season that it sounds like you typically undergo. And I'm absolutely fascinated to dive into these Lee Priest inspired type off seasons from you. So as we get into the details, just provide us a brief outline real quick. You said that this past off season was 2 years in length. Is that more or less typical for you? And then tell us about your peak body weight and just how many pounds, how many kilos over stage weight you tend to get.
Okay. So my very, very first prep I ever did, a guy came to us in the gym and basically said, you should try natural bodybuilding. I was like, right, okay, this sounds, really interesting. And he gave us an off-season diet, basically, to follow. It was like, you guys want to do a show, you're going to have to start eating. So my typical day at that time was, cereal in the morning or toast, a protein shake after training, maybe some chicken wraps at lunch at work, and then maybe a small snack when I got in. So he was like, here's your chicken and rice and potato diet kind of thing. So I would have been probably like tripled my calorie intake for the very, very first like off season I did. I was like fairly lean on holiday at 2007, probably about 12 and a half, 13 stone, set of abs, reasonably good shape. And from that, I probably put on about 3 stone in about 4 months. So then basically to December, I was up at like the 100 kilo mark. And yeah, there's actually some pictures on my Instagram and a few other bits of my very, very first photo I ever took in the gym before I started my first cut. And as you can see, like, fairly tubby around the midsection. You can see I've got some mass, see that I train, and obviously then sort of diet down. So that was probably the quickest I ever lost any weight for a show. It was a 16-week prep. I went from about, say, 101 kilos or so down to about 78, 77, something like that, around that mark for my very first show, which I won my qualifier. Same again, not in the best condition, but good enough. So that was a very, very quick, short space of time to do that. After I did that show in 2008, that finals, I have the same process. So what I would always tell myself at the end is I'm not going to get fat in the off season. Okay. But when I look back, if I look at what I did and what I consumed to do that, and there's quite a few different scenarios over that period of time. Now, 2009 was probably the best example because I was doing, 50 grams of carbs a day, 2 hours of cardio a day, and then I went from 1,500 calories a day to 3,000 overnight, literally the day after the show. No cardio, no real activity apart from walking to the work each day where I was at a gym. So my weight skyrocketed, probably like for the first few weeks after a show, like we're talking like a stone a week. Like it was like bang, bang, bang. Because your body's like primed for fat gain at that point. Whether people want to believe it's not, it's just a rebound. But, I obviously had like tripled my calories. There was no reverse diet back in them days or any kind of thing thought about. It was, I just want to feel better. So then obviously, you're binge eating, you're getting back to some normality with food, but you're then obviously having stuff on top. So the calorie intake had obviously skyrocketed, and then obviously then decided to then cut back and then do it all over again. So you're going through this yo-yo dieting process of like starving yourself and then obviously then putting your calories really, really high. So it wasn't until I got to about 2013 where obviously I'd come off the back of a very, very like long off season of doing 50 grams of carbs a day and very high activity to no activity, just weight training and eating a lot of food. I switched from a low carb to a high carb diet, moderate protein. When I was a junior, I was having like 400 grams of protein a day and like 50 carbs. So it was that was the way my diet was set up. So that was when I got to my absolute biggest, which was, they said it was like 17 stone 10 or something it was, which was like 111, 112 kilos. And that's what that prep took the longest time to get that weight off. It took a good 7 or 8 months at that time to get down to about 76, 77 for the show. And then I came third in that qualifier and then managed to probably lose a couple of kilos towards the British Finals on the pro card. So after that time, I decided, right, this year you're a pro now, you're not going to get fat in the off season. And lo and behold, I actually did pretty well. That year, I stayed about 1.5 stone or 10 kilos above stage weight. But what I was consuming to do that was very, very little. That was probably the least progress I ever made in an off season. I came last in my first Grand Prix, which was the first pro show, 7th out of 7. Easily people I should have beaten on there if I was in better condition. But on the same side, I'd made myself miserable by under eating for a whole year. Because it was like, you need to keep some abs, so you're going to have to do a bit of cardio and you're going to have to not eat as much. And as I said, I was getting fatter on about 2,200 calories or so. So whether I look back and gone, okay, well, we should have been doing more cardio, whatever, I was pretty miserable. Didn't enjoy that season at all. And it really kind of hit home when I got to 2014. It was like, right, well, if you're going to do well in natural bodybuilding at a pro level, you're going to just need to do it the way you want to do it and not worry about what everyone else was saying. So that's pretty much what I did. Took 2015 off and then came back in 2016. Same again, 2015, got up to about 102 kilos again, and then back down to 76 for Worlds by the time I ended up winning British World Finals. So for me, it's a good 40 to 50 pounds over stage weight every time.
Got it. You kind of alluded an answer to my follow-up question here. Before doing so, though, I would like to mention to all of our listeners, go to Bob's Instagram and check out a video he posted a couple of weeks ago showing his off-season physique and his contest prep physique. It's your body weight in the off-season, quite frankly, especially nowadays, you push things a lot higher than most would feel comfortable. But at the end of the day, when it comes to contests, you come in peeled, you're successful. And I think that's something that a lot of people need to think about when, they're passionate about this sport. They want to make the most amount of progress possible. That it doesn't matter how you look in the off season. It matters how you look on show day.
I think like some of the social media side has a little bit to do with that, because if someone's quite active on social media and they are posting pictures and stuff a lot and you get a little bit fatter, like people are going to comment. Like I've never posted an off-season picture like I look like, because I think that all it would do is just make me feel rubbish about myself and then start to like not trust the process and worry about what everyone else thinks. Whereas I couldn't really care anything less about what anyone thinks about how I look in an off-season. Like I'm going to be fat in a pair of jeans kind of thing, and I'll wear an extra baggy top kind of thing, and I'm okay with that. But I think the thing for me is that, you said, what matters most to me is coming back improved. And for me, performance is everything. So for me, I want to feel like an absolute machine in the gym. And it's not really until I get into the higher weight brackets that I actually feel very, very good. As in, like, I feel like I could, whatever I put on the bar, I'm going to lift. And that's something I think that maybe that's what I'm a little bit more addicted to, as opposed to some people are more addicted to keeping abs because they want to be able to just whip the top off at any time and take a picture. Whereas for me, like I am like, I want to get up to be using 3 plates on a bench for reps. Like I don't, for me at the moment, like I can just about get a single or a double on it and everything hurts. Whereas obviously for me, like I want to feel like that day in, day out, where I walk into the gym and like I can't wait to train. I'm reasonably fit still, even when I'm heavy. Like I can do them big back down sets and supersets and stuff like that, and still have quite a good lung capacity on me. And I'm used to doing that. So I think that for me, as I said, it's performance is everything. That's all I'm really worried about. How strong I am, how good I feel in the gym. If I get a little bit out of breath putting my shoes on kind of thing, or socks on, it's not the end of the world for me.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And ultimately, you're kind of bringing together some concepts we've touched on in past podcasts, particularly with Jack Thorburn, who has pushed his body weight to some upper limits this offseason as well. And he mentioned the same thing as you, just having this performance mindset, focusing on your lifts in the gym and making that progress. And he recently went through a mini cut, and people can already tell that he's making dramatic changes to his physique. And clearly he's still tens of pounds away from stage weight. And again, this concept of evidence-based practice, I would say the literature, we don't really know what kind of surplus we should be in. I think it's becoming popular that a lot of people think, well, as an advanced athlete, you can't put on that much muscle, so you should, take a really small surplus, and that's all you need. And then again, with social media, people are scared to push that surplus because they'll lose their abs. But when we have these successful competitors who aren't afraid to push their body weight to the upper limits, they explain that well. Their performance skyrockets in the gym, and it results in them looking better and better each time they get on stage. I think that's fascinating, because in the trenches experience, it matters, and we have a lot to learn when it comes to the more scientific end of this. And I think this information is extremely important to our listeners who might not know the answer to this question, but at the end of the day, when there's so many successful people doing similar things, that says a lot.
I think that it's important to look at, as I said, like for me, I want to get top end strong. So I want to be able to like my squatting takes such a dive in when I'm on prep compared to anything else. Like, to put it into perspective, I'll get up to like maybe a 200, 210, 220 squat on, obviously on a normal back squat. I'm lucky if I'm getting 3 plates aside on a squat in season. I don't know if because I've got like little child hips or whatever it is, but it's one of them things. Like for me, like if you want to yield a good muscle response and you want to create density, thickness, hardness, and all the things kind of that you would want as a bodybuilder, you're going to have to lift some decent amount of weight. And for me, it's almost like it's not even really possible. I'm, 73 kilos or so. If I was just to stay within them realms, my strength isn't going up. It's getting to a certain point maybe where it goes up. And then, okay, you can maybe make the argument, are you getting much stronger for the body weight you're putting on? So that's probably the biggest argument I could guess you could say people could make. But on the same side, it's like if you want to improve and make that muscle growth, you're probably going to have to do something you've not done before. And as I said, if people are, just concerned about how they look, they maybe could have made more progression if they weren't so worried about it. And I think that's the question that, and I think that's a genetic component as well. Some people will be able to, rise a small amount above their kind of maintenance calories and still make progress every day. I've got clients like you. I've got a guy I help called Chris Paling, who is the most shredded guy probably in the UK without a doubt. He doesn't have skin. It's like ridiculous. And he is one of them guys, we push his food so hard in the off season and he gets 3 kilos above stage weight. Like he has one of them metabolisms which he will just soak up all the food and, he can't put weight on for love nor money. But each year, he isn't really getting very heavy above his stage weight. But what he is doing, he is then getting a little bit of size each time. But the guys who are able to maybe push their body weights higher, they definitely make a bit more progress between each years. So he's still improving. So it's not saying you can't improve. But as I said, if I could get him 10 kilos above stage weight, would he make a bigger leap in progress? So that's the thing to look at, I think.
Yeah, I think that's great context. There are a lot of factors to consider when it comes to off-season body weight. A lot of people like to get stuck in these boxes, and it's like, well, you shouldn't get past 20% body fat in the off-season, or you shouldn't get more than 30 pounds over stage weight in the off-season. But really, it comes down to, well, genetically, what is your settling point? What body weight, body composition can you achieve that allows you to live happily? You're eating a good amount of food. You don't have to do a ton of cardio. You have to consider that. And then also what body weight allows you to recover the best from your work in the gym and allows you to drive performance to the utmost degree.
And do you know what I think is really, really important is people have to do what's right for them. So if your mental well-being is that if you're, if I'm sat there in an off season and I'm eating my bowl of rice, resting on my tummy, I haven't got an issue with it, right? But there's some people who, that's a massive concern for them, for their overall mental well-being. They don't like the way they look. They don't feel good about themselves. Their confidence takes a knock. And therefore, they don't feel as good as they would if they maybe just kept midsection in better check. So if you're not comfortable with doing that, then by all means, okay, you might be limiting your progress a little bit, but on the same side, your overall well-being, if I get a fat joke in an off season, I couldn't care less. Bounces off my back because I know I'm fat. That's cool. But there's other people who, they would very much take that to heart and then want to go on a mini cut because of it. So I think that, as I said, you do what's right for you, because at the end of the day, you've got to live in that body every day. You've gym and go the way you feel. And as I said, I'm sure if people could experience the way I feel in an off season, although doing the day-to-day tasks and showing people around health clubs and stuff in the UK when I'm a bit heavier body weight, and it's you're getting a little bit out of breath when you've gone up 4 flights of stairs, I'm all right with it. But there's other people who would just be like, I need to keep higher cardio. I need to be lighter because they just feel better. So, as I said, it's up to them, really.
Absolutely. I think that is the primary factor to consider, what best suits your psychology and lifestyle. But also, as you touched on, and I think I would agree with this, ultimately pushing your body weight a bit higher, I think we can be sure that you're not spinning your wheels, that you're going to make some progress. But if you do try to limit your calorie intake, and I think some people really do it within this concept of optimal. They think that, again, not getting over fat is best for their progress. I mean, I would probably suggest that, if you keep too hard of a restriction on your calories, you might actually be spinning your wheels. Whereas if you just push things, yes, you might get a little fatter in the process, but you're also we can be sure that you're not risking not making progress. Like there's definitely something good happening as well.
It's like, for me, it's like, it's like looking at like a bank balance, isn't it? It's like, yes, okay, you're spending this much, but some days, you might be dipping into that overdraft. But if you've got an abundance of money, it doesn't matter what lifestyle you're living, you still got loads of money. And it's kind of like, it's the same with calories. It's like, if you've got that abundance there, you'll always know that and that's one thing I can definitely say. For every single off season I've done, I've never once been in a calorie deficit. Probably not one day of the year. Whether it be that, I've done a lot of activity that day and trained, like there probably would have been a dense calorie meal going in that, even to probably out of what you would consider like any deficit by any means. And that would be every day, day in, day out. So I could definitely say that.
Absolutely. And something that's just always in the back of my mind when it comes to this discussion is that, when we look at the highest documented ever fat-free mass index, it's in sumo wrestlers. They have the largest amounts of fat-free mass, and people like to obsess over, insulin sensitivity and a partitioning ratio and this and that. And I think it's all fascinating. These are great nuances. But at the end of the day, putting on size is a fairly straightforward process, and we can be sure that if you push things, some size is going to happen.
That's it. Always a famous saying, isn't it? If you want to make an omelette, you're going to have to crack some eggs, and I kind of live by that. I think it's important to, as I said, you're going to need to make sure that you are doing enough to build muscle, not just doing enough to look half decent all the time.
Definitely. When it comes to our primary concern with pushing body weight in the off season, I think the primary one and only legitimate one here is just how it affects your future contest prep, right? So how long the dieting process is going to take. And for that reason, I'd like to learn a little bit more about your process. And I think it is pretty lengthy considering the amount of weight you have to lose. With that being said, do you do it all in one go, or do you break up the dieting process? It's become kind of more popular to run sort of a two-part diet. So, you kind of lower body weight to a point where it's more or less like the leanest you can maintain and be relatively, happy with your lifestyle, which usually means like you have 20 to 25 pounds to go. And then you take a little half time and then make that last contest prep push, or do you kind of just do everything straight through?
So yeah, I would definitely say that's become more popular, but no, I'm pretty old school, I guess, really. Like I said, when it's time to diet, it's time to diet. So I do very much flick the mental switch at the start of a prep. So for me, dieting's probably done in phases. So when I start my off season, so this year and last year was a little bit of an exception because I already had the experience to know that I'm probably where I was body weight wise, would need to bring it down a little bit. But when it hit, I think it was just the week before the British finals for the BNBF last year, September, I'd started my contest prep. And so basically I'm not having cheat meals. So I'm not eating burgers at the weekends or Domino's or whatever. That's point number one. Number two, I'm eating a ton of food still. So I'm not, I'm doing a little bit more activity and I'm eating a ton of food. So actually what I would say is that the first probably 6 months of a contest prep is probably the most optimal off season you could do. So what I mean by that is that I think my training intensity gets a little bit better. I think I get a little bit fitter because I'm doing a little bit more cardio. We're not talking a lot. We're just talking like a bit more steps a day. So I'll go out for a morning walk for 20, 30 minutes, whatever, at the start of prep. Usually it was quite short. And I've basically taken any indirects or any rubbish out of my diet, whether it be barbecue sauce, whether it be snacks on top. I'm a sucker for a sandwich in an off season. Love to eat on top of my meals and have some. So I take out all the things that's not basically calculated or measured. So there's no indirect eating. There's no other bits and pieces on top. So it's basically you are just living a contest prep, but the food calorie intake is very, very high still. So what's happening is you'll then probably find that you get a little bit fuller. Your digestion's got a little bit better because you're not eating a lot of rubbish. And I'm saying that I don't really eat rubbish in the off season. It's just I eat on top of things a lot. Like if I eat my meal of steak and rice and I want a protein bar, I'm going to have one. So it's kind of like that. So the calorie intake's going up, but it's never really like junk food. I'm not really a junk food person. So that kind of gets cleaned up. And then what happens is that the hardest thing for people to kind of do the contest prep, the way I do it, is patience. Because you are losing a very, very small amount of weight per week, sometimes not even a pound, but your body composition is changing. So you're getting tighter. It's almost like people can say you're growing into the show, but you're probably not really, but you're getting a change in fullness, you're getting a change in body fat, and your training performance is still very, very, very good. So that kind of first phase is what I would call almost like phase one, if you look at it that way, is that I'm not really doing anything other than training my ass off, moving a bit more, and just basically not eating anything on top of my diet foods. But it's still a very good amount of calories. It's probably in the region of about 500 grams of carbs a day. It's not a carb cycle. I always start on just basically one diet, and it's just the same for 7 days. And as I said, I yield a response through exercise to create a bit of a deficit. So that's basically how it works. Once I then get to that point where I go, right, you're 25 weeks out and you have 30 pounds to lose, that's just over a pound a week. Okay, we'll just roll with that. And then if I then have a few weeks where it's like, okay, you've now 15 weeks out and you still got 25 pounds to lose, then that's when I maybe make things a bit more drastic and start to maybe carb cycle up cardio a bit more than I would have liked to start off with. But it's done in like a progression. So I might have little things in my diet, like at a weekend, I might have ribeye steaks. So then I'll go, right, okay, we're going to take the fat down. I'm going to change to fillet steaks, or I'm going to change to ground beef, or I'm going to change to those kind of things, which is basically like, it's still a high day, but I'm just kind of making a slightly cleaner choice or a slightly lower calorie choice. But it's, like I'm taking out protein bars, or I'm taking out this, things that I maybe have factored in, which I'm going to go, I'm just going to nip that. I'm going to nip that. And then almost move into the phase where I end up on a very, very bro-like diet. It's very kind of like, it's very boring with regards to most people to eat. It's pretty much chicken and potatoes and oats, and that's pretty much all I'm eating. Whereas a lot more variety, like if I want lamb and, at the start of that prep, I can have a red meat meal, I can choose what I want. I'm not so worried if it's like the fat content slightly up, slightly down. You just basically, it's going through a phase to where you're slowly, what we call turning the screw. So you're slowly going, okay, let's just make a small adjustment and let's go through the gears. And that's kind of how my contest prep would work.
Cool. So it sounds like over this process, you're never really incorporating a diet break or an extended period within it. It's just that, as you come down to these finer points, you maybe just throw in a refeed here and there, which would be a high day in your carb cycling approach.
Yeah, definitely. And I've never been a fan of mini cuts. And saying that, I do have clients who maybe need to, at points, because they're not happy and their training's not very good and things like that, where they might have to do something like that. But for me, I'm very, very good at on and off switch. So I'm a good bodybuilder all year round. I don't skip training sessions. I don't skip meals. Do you know what I mean? I do all the basics well with maybe a 10% flexibility. Like if the missus says, can we go for a burger Saturday? Oh yeah, but we went last night. Can still go for one again the next day. Like I'm not going to worry about it. So it's that kind of thing. All I'm really doing at that first part of contest prep, as I said, is I'm just basically going, right, well, I'm on a contest prep now, so I'm not messing about anymore. I'm not, I'm not late for meals and things like that. Like all them things where you could go, right, okay, you're now like, going to do things absolutely as perfect as you can. That's kind of what happens. So like, if I've got events, I've got special occasions coming up, even if it's 25 weeks out from a show, I'm not going and eating the food that everyone else is eating. And I'm not going, if my mates are going drinking, I'm going out, but I'm not drinking. So it's kind of like, do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing where it's like, right, I've started my contest prep now. The switch is down and that's me. That's cool. I mean, it might be 12 months, but I'm willing to make that sacrifice because I don't want to have to do a proper mini cut during the year. So that's just the way I do it.
For sure. I think that kind of speaks to most of our psychologies in the sport, and it's always going to be an on-off switch. For you, that sounds to be particularly the case. So even in your 2-year off season where you're pushing body weight up, it sounds like there's also never, you you don't utilize mini cuts ever within your off seasons?
I've never done one.
Really?
Never done one.
Wow.
Because I said it, just for me, it's like, it's more the mental break. Because if I'm going to diet, I'm going to diet. If I'm going to go off season, I'm going to go off season. Because for me, as I said, it comes back around to the, progress at all costs. So if I'm getting up to them high levels of body fat and you're starting to go, midsection's getting a little bit bigger and I don't feel quite as fit, maybe, or whatever it might be, most people then will just go on a mini cut. But then is that then a phase they could have gone through where they could have yielded an extra couple of pounds of muscle or density because they're never really willing to ride through that wave of like, oh, I feel a bit shit.
Very interesting. Bob, I really appreciate your insight. I know the listeners are going to love this conversation as much as I have, but that's all I have for you today. For people who want to go and support you, learn more about you, where should they go?
So obviously I've got a new YouTube account. If anyone wants to follow us on YouTube, which is called the IFBB Natty Pro. So there's a couple of videos up, film part 3, which was arm day today, which was cool. But also the Instagram is Bob Waterhouse 86. My name actually is Rob, but a lot of people call me Bob, so that's cool as well. That's fine. So you're obviously welcome to inquire if you want to follow what we're doing, or if people are interested in coaching, they can just give me a DM through there.
Excellent. And all of those links will be in the show notes. But that does it for another episode of the Muscle Memoirs Podcast. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, guys. Mike here. If you're interested in learning more about how to maximize your health, body composition, and performance, head over to hammerawayfitness.com, where you can sign up for coaching or even just schedule an hour consult with me to get some of your training and nutrition questions answered. Also, if you enjoyed this episode as much as I did and would like to further support the growth of the Muscle Memoirs podcast, you can give a donation to the link in the show notes, leave us a review, and or share this episode with your friends, whether that be dropping the link in a group chat or putting a screenshot in your Instagram story. I truly appreciate it.